Let's get straight in. WISE. What does WISE mean, and why is it important?
WISE means well-being, inclusion, sustainability, and equal opportunity. And this is a new center that we created last year in the OECD, and we have a focus on improving people's well-being in a sustainable manner. We put a lot of emphasis and attention on equity and opportunities for all, and we understand, the importance that well-being means to people. So we really sort of start from what matters to them in everything we do, in everything we measure, sort of analyze, and suggest to policymakers.
How do you capture well-being in a spreadsheet, if that's indeed where you're trying to capture it?
Yes, indeed, and that's exactly through the spreadsheet that we do this, because we have been the first, I think, in almost in the world actually to associate well-being with some numbers. So by well-being, what we mean essentially is the fact that people put emphasis or sort of give attention, give importance to things that are not just about the living material conditions. So this is about what is going on in their lives every day, what matters to them in terms of personal relationship, in terms of purpose they have in life, but also in terms, of course, of things such as basic opportunities when it comes to health, education. So we have very specific definitions. We're looking at 11 dimensions of people life, and they are both about sort of economic and non-economic well-being. And we are looking at well-being of generations today, so at current well-being, but we're looking at sustainability as well, because we're looking at what are the resources that essentially underpinning the generations of well-being over time. So we're sort of looking at it from a dynamic point of view, obviously ensuring that what's well-being for today's generation doesn't sort of come at the cost of lower well-being for future generations. So we consider sort of current and future well-being together.
So if you and I and your husband and my wife, we go out for a cup of coffee, right? Somewhere along the Champs-Élysées. And I ask you, what is well-being? What language would you use over a cup of coffee? What is well-being?
Well-being, I think, is essentially having the possibility of choosing the life you want to choose, you want to live, and not being sort of constrained, not being forced in the choices you make. And that means, having the possibility, having the ability to understand the world, so having a good education, having a good health, which of course was crucially reminded to us by the pandemic, but also having the possibility of choosing the time, so being completely sort of mastering your time, being free of using the time you want in the way you want, and spending that time with the people you love.
Before we get to sustainability, and then the trust lab, and then trust, you said one of the indicators of well-being is being free to spend time with people that you love. So how do you capture that type of language in a spreadsheet? Now I'm being a little bit unfair because we're sitting having a cup of coffee with each other, right? So you've used language that fits a cup of coffee, but now I'm asking you perhaps to go a little bit back to the spreadsheet. How do you capture those softer nuances on a spreadsheet? How do you say we want to open up time for people to spend quality time with others that are special to them? What does that look like?
So there are a couple of ways we do that. One is this: we just look at the numbers of free hours that people can enjoy once they have finished the job. So when they're not working sort of outside home, or when they're not working inside home. So we're just looking at really free time for themselves.
Yeah.
And so really it is about it's looking at their activities essentially over the day, and understanding which hours are just completely for them to decide upon. And the other type of indicators we're looking at is sort of the type of satisfaction people may have in the way they're spending their time. So whether they feel strained about their time, whether they feel okay, that sort of they have good feelings in terms of they're able to sort of reconcile their professional and sort of private objectives in life.
Now we've moved on to our second cup of coffee. We've moved away from WISE, and now we haven't moved away from WISE. We've moved out from to that other element that you mentioned, sustainability. And you're not quite sure if I've glazed over or not, but I've asked you now to describe sustainability to me. How do you do that?
But so sustainability, as I mentioned, is about understanding, how you create well-being in the future. So what are the basic drivers of well-being over time? And the way we're looking at it in the OECD is starting from sort of what we call some key assets, some types of capital, and so economic capital, but also human capital, social capital, natural capital, and understanding that those are the pillars of sustainability in the sense that they are the sort of the stocks and reserves of elements that generate value and well-being over time. So we look at sustainability essentially as all those elements being in place to create conditions for higher well-being or high well-being of future generations. So, within social capital, for instance, we're looking at things such as trust, of course, trust in others, trust in institutions, trust in governments, and also other things such as norms, for instance, what is actually driving people's behavior beyond or besides their self-interest.
Trust. Now on to trust. What got me into your email inbox was the Trust Lab. I was very excited to come across the Trust Lab. It's, to my mind, profoundly important work that's been done there. What is the work of the Trust Lab and how does that relate to WISE?
So Trust Lab is one of our initiatives connected to the analysis and the understanding of social capital. So that is really about measuring trust in others and in other institutions, but also understanding the drivers of trust. So, it's a set of lab games that we put in place in many countries where we're observing some people behaving and kind of trusting or not each other. And we're trying sort of not only to measure and understand how important and how sort of large is the trust that they have, but also what are the conditions that enable trust. And, again, what is that underpinning that sort of relationship of trust. And, every time that you come with, or you try sort of to quantify some concept or some notion that people perceive as being an intangible one, and I think social capital is one of those. It's very important, it's very valuable, but it is obviously much more intangible than something like economic capital. So every time you do that, you got to measure it in a quite sort of rigorous way. And one of the problems of measuring trust in others or measuring trust in institutions is that the type of available data that comes, from sort of regular surveys is not high quality enough. And so we came up with this initiative, Trust Lab, with the idea of collecting sort of rigorous measures of trust. And so I think one of the interesting findings from Trust Lab is that trust varies quite a lot across societies in terms of strength, but also dynamics. But there are also common drivers. And I think this is really what is important from a public policy perspective, because, once you get an understanding or what is enabling trust, how you can power trust, how you can support trust, how you can underpin trust. This is something that can be replicated, across different societies, across different countries, and obviously also, within countries at different sort of levels and in different type of sort of geographies and other sort of settings.
So you're saying that fostering trust is replicable across different settings? Okay,
it is.
What are those? Using your language, what are those drivers for trust, social trust? So
one of the big driver of trust is actually kindness and it's sort of a higher sense of reciprocity, a higher sense of sort of solidarity. And essentially, if you have people that are very altruistic, those people are also going to trust each other much, much more. But going perhaps to features that relate more sort of to the functioning of the system and kind of the public policies, we also see that things such as redistributions of opportunities and economic redistribution that actually can improve trust. Or if you're looking at things such as the quality of governance, so when you have governments that are extremely competent, but also they have high integrity, strong values, so that they operate, very, very aligned to those sort of principles of integrity and competence, then these are also governments, obviously, that are extremely trusted by by citizens and by people. In general, when you are living in a society and a place that is very inclusive, in the sense that it gives you chances to thrive, it gives you, the possibility to become, somebody else. Those places are also places that really have more trust and that function much better. And in general, when you have places and policies specifically that are done with citizens, that are done together with civil society, so there is this sort of joint role for everybody sort of to participate, to be an active part in what the society becomes and the way the society is designed and the way society is running. Those are also places with a lot of trust. So it is replicable. We're saying trust is part of social capital. It means it typically takes time and a number of sort of interactions to be generated. So, it's not that you can't do it sort of overnight. You can't just build it from scratch.
There's an interesting tension for me personally, and it's between the inner world and the outer world. Let me assume that an organization as respected as the OECD and of course WISE and the Trust Lab is predominantly about economics, and you want data, you want hard data. So that's on the one side. But on the other side, you have this inner world of the individual from which kindness, for example, comes, or reciprocity comes, or being interested in the other. And it seems traditionally that those two worlds seem to be at odds with each other. You can't put kindness in a spreadsheet. However, in many respects, it lays the foundation for our external world. So that's a tension I see, this internal world, difficult to put in numbers, to put into the test tube, but it has such powerful and real world implications in terms of the ways institution works, inclusivity, etc., as you so well described. How is it that we can drive kindness, that profoundly human thing? Is that even such a thing? Or does the OECD merely observe kindness and then look for the correlations between it and other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I must say that apart from Trust Lab, we never really we have never really done sort of any work in terms of kindness, but I can point you to actually interesting initiatives by other organizations that look at that. I mean, kindness, even if again, it's not something you will ever read in our policy recommendations, but you sort of intuitively, it is obviously part of the sort of the features that you would like to have, in some of the way public services are delivered to people. So, we're always looking, and that is something we do in the OECD, to look at the effectiveness of public policies, or in particular, the public services being delivered. And again, we don't frame that through kindness, but what we're saying is obviously is the importance of making sure that these are people-centered, these are inclusive in the sense that they are conveying, good values of considerations for people, of human dignity. And so from that point of view, we've done work about recognition. And so that's the wording we're using, recognition, recognizing the others, recognizing the people, recognizing their identity, their sense of belonging. And in that sense, we can say that obviously a number of public services should be put in place really with that perspective. And actually the basic perspective that public policies and institutions are there to serve people. And so really with that very, very humble attitude of essentially delivering something that is not just useful, but is actually also there to remind the person that person is obviously a human being, and therefore needs to be considered, for what the person is entirely. And so with that very fundamental sense of recognition. So again, we don't use the word kindness, not yet. The tension between economics and kindness, actually, first of all, quite interesting. I think economists started attracted to the notion of trust very, very early on, because they actually realized that trust is not just the social glue of society, it's not only what sort of holds societies together, it's also what very often holds economies together, is well known to actually lower the transaction costs and actually underpins a number again of sort of commercial relationships. That said, indeed, when we're talking about sort of economists. We're not talking about, we're talking about market economists, and those need to also operate with rules. So I wouldn't think that necessarily those rules needs to embed sort of kindness. Nevertheless, those rules more and more need to take into account values. They need to take into account norms, for instance, such as fairness, the sense of justice of people. And those things actually do matter as well to shape the market results.
Let's assume now our society that you and I share, in our corner of the world, trust is present. How better are things likely to be? Across which dimensions, which levels?
I think, again, at the level of the function of the economy, we do see that that countries where the level of trust are higher, these are also the countries that innovate the most. Sometimes they can be the most productive. And again, they function in a little bit more efficient way. Again, because they have, they thanks to high trust, they reduce the sort of transaction cost. But it's not just about sort of the economic case or sort of, the economic benefits. As I mentioned, is also, obviously the social benefits from a high level of trust. So, these are societies, or the more trusting societies are also the societies with the higher sort of levels of social cohesion and solidarity. Very often the societies with lower levels of inequalities, although of course all those things are very much correlated to each other. So sometimes you don't know, it's hard to distinguish between sort of the cause and the consequences. And probably, we know that there is an interrelation. So it is really a two-way street. It goes from one direction to the other. So you can't just say, this comes first and then the other sort of comes second. But interestingly, also the societies that are more sort of more trusting and trustworthy are also the ones where people are the happiest. And so, trust really drives this higher sense of sort of people's well-being and indeed sentiments of higher security. And that security is not just personal or sort of security of personal safety, it's also about economic security. Because of course you always feel, trust brings you, the feeling that you are in it together. And so, regardless of what's going to happen to you, there's going to be sort of a social infrastructure there that is there to support you, obviously in the worst possible moment. And I think we saw that in action quite a lot during the pandemic. And in fact, I think the first months during the pandemic were quite distinctive, I would say, quite interesting, because you had a lot of, those episodes where people were helping each other, a lot of communities coming together and really sort of, I think, showing the value of trust. And that helped considerably at a time where, of course, governments had to sort of step up quickly. But it wasn't just about what governments were doing in terms of the policies, because the pandemic was changing so profoundly the way we were living, and just changing all the sort of the type of connections we were having, the way we were sort of living together. And so I think the value of trust and the value of sort of community being there again, so trusting each other, that was really key, I think, to survive the very first months and waves of the pandemic.
So my understanding of cities is that they cover 2% of the world's surface, but the majority of humanity lives in cities. By 2050, 70% of humanity is going to live in cities. Even though they occupy such a small land area, cities are responsible for the vast amounts of consumption, emissions, economic activity, decisions that shape the future. So it's been said that if you can shape the future of a city or cities, you can shape the future of humanity, which I can certainly subscribe to. What I'm particularly interested in is the intersection of trust and developing or building or fostering better cities, which currently exist or may exist in the future. I find that a fascinating topic. What, to your mind, is the benefit of having trust at the heart of city development or renewal or planning?
So I think, I would perhaps, just restate what you just said in terms of the importance of cities, to say that they are the centers of gravity. And I think you're totally right. They are the centers of gravity. Interestingly, I think sometimes they are sort of the place where issues originate, but they're also the places where solutions originate. And one of the I think very specific element that connects cities with trust is that we know that actually trust is very place-based, or let's say that it's easier to actually enhance trust and increase trust at local level than it is actually at national level. And that is just because a lot of trust is sort of really, it really requires sort of a lot of sort of geographical sort of proximity, and really requires people to be, you know, physically together or close to each other. And in general, that also, I mean, it's also true for well-being, that a lot of the drivers of well-being are really, really sort of local and place-based and city-based. And so, you know, government can come with sort of the best of the strategy for enhancing people's well-being. And a lot of those, you know, very specific actions that are required to increase well-being need to be actually taken by cities at really local level. And trust is exactly that feature. And in fact, we have done some research that is connected to Trust Lab that was actually showing that it's really the local government and cities in a way that have most to deliver, or they can be even more effective. In a way, we know what sustainable cities are, and you know, those cities are cities that are sort of really, really sort of working, I would say, in a people-centered manner, which means that, you know, really sort of focus on enhancing people's well-being, on getting this strong sense of connectedness, cities that engage with people, cities that leave no one behind, cities that innovate, cities that are powered by the communities, by the citizens, by the civil society, and for all those elements of sustainability to actually be there, you know, you need trust to sustain them, because it's not just, again, I mean, we're not talking about central planning here. We're not talking about the government comes and say, I'm going to design a city by saying this is a city that needs to be people-centered. You can do a little bit of that, of course, especially when you do things such as urban planning and, you know, number of very specific technical things. You can obviously do that with good principles in mind, theoretical principles, or cities that innovate. So you can come with all your beautiful sort of set of principles that you want to impose top down, but those principles need to be accepted, endorsed, you know, by the communities and by the citizens. And for that, you need trust. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
But what are the top 3 benefits, to your mind, of a high trust city? Now, an obvious answer might be, you know, high levels of diversity, inclusion, high levels of connectivity, etc. But is there something else that comes to mind? The top 3 benefits of high trust cities?
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't say this is because to me, yeah, I wouldn't think the benefits is the opposite of challenge. The challenge, I think, is really sort of what are the stumbling blocks to trust. And here, in terms of benefits, it's more about what are the sort of the returns of trust. And I think, you know, I talk about higher economic and non-economic well-being, so higher quality of life for sure, including sense of well-being, but also more resilience and sustainable places. So, you know, it's really the places where you have a high level of trust are also the ones that sort of kind of bounce back. They can absorb the shocks, they can absorb the change, they actually even embrace the change as a factor, I think, of success. And connected to that, I would say the third type of benefits, you know, more innovations and more dynamisms, generally speaking.
Romina, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the very best with your leadership at WISE at OECD.
Thank you so much and good luck. See you.